My view is we should prepare for paranoia before the event, and we must hope that tough times do not come or remain, but we must prepare for the worst. Therefore, it is about preparation, be ready for tough times, rather than waiting for the shock to hit us. And in many ways, the Prime Minister said,
what would that look like?
I think you'll begin to see it. I mean, we have not seen the impact in the last 2 months of the Middle East war in terms of energy price transmission. It's coming, and it's coming big. And the consumers have not felt the pressure at all. And think about a consumer with limited income having to spend more directly on fuel and indirectly on other items for fuel, or dependent on fuel. The shock is coming. We had old inventory. We had the ability for oil companies to be the shock absorber. And it's a large amount of money. Therefore, I don't think you're very far away from the shock, unless, and this is where I don't have an answer, and I suppose none of us have an answer, or probably if there is anybody else in the world who has an answer, unless Iran war stops tomorrow morning. And we have been hoping for it from February 28.
I just want to come back to that point that I mentioned about the role of the private, because both of you spoke about the role of the private sector since morning, and role of the private sector in really today, in a way, we've talked about the widening income gaps. You just now referred to the purchasing power of people down the line. So how do we address that? What was the role of the private sector?
I want to here again talk about a big positive which India has. India is probably the only country in the world which has 2% CSR by every corporate above 5 crores profits. And I would like to believe most companies use it positively. There may always be exceptions, but that is a direct effective tax of 2%, which the allocation is left to each corporate. Nowhere else in the world do corporates do direct CSR out of the profits of the company. I think it's a very, very big plus. And therefore, we must be clear, we paid 27% tax, out of which 2% we allocate directly to society. Okay, that is a big plus, and I think it is being reasonably well used by most large companies. And therefore, in addition to that, do we see a world, and I'm again being a little provocative, do we see a world where at some point of time a form of universal basic income becomes more and more a reality, and somebody has to pay the cost for that?
Yeah, no, I think it's absolutely right. And I mentioned this in the morning, but it was very interesting, Uday. When we went to China, we met about 12, 14 companies, most of them in manufacturing. And then they made their presentations. And the first slide on the presentation was sales growth over the last 10 years, global geographic footprint in the last 10 years, R&D spends in the last 5 years, 10 years, depending on how old the company is. Where does the R&D talent come from? US universities, Chinese universities, Singapore universities. What are the number of patents that the company holds? And what's the longer term vision of the company? What do they want to change? So if I am a BYD, I want to ensure that the world temperature comes down by 1% because of lower emission. Their ROEs, most of them were not making too much of profits. Their ROEs were negligible. ROCs were low. So we are living in very different contexts. And you've talked about the financialization of India and everything else. And I think for achieving long-term growth, I think they have chosen a path that, spending on R&D is probably the only way to look at long-term strategic dominance and growth. And I think that's where that's what they're going after.
So Vinayak, not a debate, but a question. He's a debate master.
Uday, you have exhorted private sector to gear up. point well taken. In a 100-meter dash, the private sector, with the best of its effort, can do the first 50 meters on its own. But we have to understand that in the context that it operates, the next 50 meters to reach is outside the battery walls of your factories and your businesses. You are surrounded by inefficiencies, whether it is power or transmission or logistics or bureaucracy or corruption or judiciary. Now, that also defines the garden in which you are expecting the flowers to grow. If that soil is not proper, we may not achieve the kind of utopia you are suggesting, that we all gear up and take care of the balance sheet of the country and the P&L. So what do you have to say about the area outside my factory gate? How does it have to, and what can we do to enable that to make us more competitive?
Vinayak, very good question. And again, I will give the China example. Most of China's progress has come from state-owned enterprises. I was there about a month ago. We went to the largest car factory, including their R&D and everything else we saw, a company, domestic car company called Shanghai Auto. Okay? It's a Shanghai state-owned company. There are 80 car companies in China competing with each other, not duopolies, 80. And they compete fiercely in the marketplace as state-owned companies. What can we do as government and business together? Not only what private sector can do, but how can we improve the state-owned sector to efficiency levels which society needs? This is the mountain and a hill which China has climbed. Its entire growth is state-owned enterprises. Look at Singapore. We may say it's a city. All the major companies are state-owned. What does it take for us? I don't think you and I can answer that. But the country has to have a debate on this. State-owned enterprises is not necessarily the wrong thing. For example, if you look at the success of Aadhaar, it's a public good. It's not a Google or an Apple or a Meta. It's a public good for society. So there is ways in which we have to figure out that areas which should be with the state and build an efficiency model for the state, and where private sector cannot reach. And since, CB, this is the last question, I want to end on a very optimistic note. In this entire world, if you look at all the geopolitics around the world, one very good news which I have come across is God is Indian.
Subscribe to One India and never miss an update. Download the One India app now.